The Truth Be Told by Ishah Binah. Chapter 1. Man, where do I start? In the month of April of the year 2019, I acknowledged that I had made some poor choices in life that resulted in difficult circumstances. It so happened that I was in another one of those difficult circumstances and sought for a resolution. I knew, however, that I needed help to solve the matter. The choices that I had made that were poor were intended to be good at the first. They were poor choices because they were unwise decisions. Once I acknowledged this, I realized I need wisdom. I remembered a phone call from my mother when I was 18 and rebellious. She called me just to tell me that if you ever want wisdom, do read the book of Proverbs. That was the year of 1998. At that time, when I read Proverbs, it was difficult to understand, perhaps because I was not mature enough to know to take my time between verses to consider the meaning of the writing. Therefore, I set aside reading Proverbs in its entirety again until April of 2019. This time, I decided to listen to the book rather than read it. I began to turn on the audio Bible that I found on YouTube. The best time for me was at night because I also had a hard case of insomnia. I figured I would either hear the book of Proverbs or find sleep. Either of those were a win for me. It turned out that I received both. I would hear about 20 to 30 minutes of the book and then fall asleep. My sleep would last all the way till daybreak. By the way, I have not suffered from insomnia since then. During the month of April in the year of 2019, I began to listen to the book of Proverbs on a nightly basis until I absorbed some basic principles of wisdom. I learned that wisdom begins with fearing God. To fear God means to hate evil. Do not despise instruction. Seek wisdom early. My favorite chapter in Proverbs is chapter 8. That is where I first understood that wisdom is alive. She is referenced as she and her throughout Proverbs. The eighth chapter of Proverbs quotes her words, and verse 12 clearly begins with the words, I wisdom. In this chapter, she describes herself and says she loves those that love her, and those that seek her early will find her. So I said, I want to know her. After deciding that I will seek wisdom, my first question was, where do I start looking? I pondered this for a few minutes and then thought, oh, yeah, perhaps I should read the whole Bible from the beginning. That may seem like a challenging task, but listening to the Bible by audio made the challenge a lot more inviting. I set my headphones on with Genesis chapter 1. Let's go. While listening to Genesis, I soon noticed I needed a mindset change. I had to stop thinking, I know this story already, but rather listen with patience. I concluded that I will listen with an open mind and an open heart as if I had never heard or read any of these words before. Even the stories that I had learned to recite as a child and the chapters with the names of all the generations of whom begat whom, I will listen with patience. At first, I would listen to the audio Bible 3 to 4 days per week, hearing about 1 to 3 hours of audio on my listening days. Sometimes my mind would wander off and I might miss a big chunk of what was being read. No problem. I would just rewind back to where I last heard well. My approach was to relax and listen, taking in what understanding came to me easily and trusting God to increase my knowledge in the writings that were too hard for me. Nevertheless, inclining my ear to hear all, one book at a time in the order in which they are listed from Genesis to Revelation. Shortly after I began this reading regimen, I became convicted when doing other things to pass time, such as watch movies or gossip on the phone. I would think about the progress I could be making on the new journey that I had committed to. So I began to replace all of my unnecessary activities with listening to the audiobook. I would still be present with my family on movie night or gatherings, but with my headphones on and hearing my book, being determined to hear the story and remembering that my goal was to find wisdom and straighten out or fix the mistakes that I had made in life. I found more opportunities to listen and hear. I would listen while doing house chores, driving, cooking, shopping, and working out. I started listening at every opportunity because I wanted to finish the story. Therefore, I heard the entire Bible read by audio within the space of 3 months. After hearing the story, just using the relax and listen approach, I learned of many incidences and concepts that had never come across my ears before. This being though I had been raised in a God fearing and church going home. I was also reminded of the things I had learned of God as a child and had disregarded to my own hurt when I became grown. An awesome example of one of the incidents that I was excited to learn of is how the Lord fought for his people as he led them through the wilderness. Moses held up both of his hands toward the Lord for an entire day as the people of the Lord defended themselves against the nation that fought against them without reason. When Moses would put his hands up, the people of the Lord prevailed in battle. When he put his hands down, the other nation prevailed. Therefore, Moses, with some assistance, kept his hands up till sundown, and the battle was won by the Lord's people. Also, I learned about days of the year that the Lord set aside for celebrating and joyful feasting. Very importantly, I set out to do what I learned that the Lord desires of us as I understood these things and to discard habits that I learned are not pleasing to Him. When I set out to do what I learned in my audio reading of the Holy Bible, there were some that were disappointed in decisions that I had made. This is because it seemed that the decision would affect them directly. However, the conclusion of each of these events went well for everyone involved. No harm was done. Though I was learning at a fast pace, there were also very many parts of the book that I did not understand whatsoever. Thankfully, there was a verse that said to ask the Lord for wisdom. Therefore, I listened to the book again with that thought in mind. Ask the Lord for wisdom. Upon the second time of listening to the Bible, I began to take notes, look up words in the dictionary when needed, and asked the Lord for understanding of the sentences that were hard for me. Each time I asked to understand something, the Lord enlightened me. The very first thing I noticed during this reading was a nostalgic feeling, as if I were patiently sitting and listening to a great grandfather tell me about our family history. I was also delighted to find that I was understanding a lot more content than in the first time around. Meanwhile, as my enjoyment of new understanding was steadily increasing, the hard challenges in my life began to dissipate swiftly. Problems were swept away with quick resolution, notwithstanding the need to resolve problems seemed to be increasing. There was one thing after another continuously. Nevertheless, I remained on my journey to find wisdom. Then something occurred that is not new to me, but turned out to be a very powerful gift. I had a particular dream. In this dream, I saw a large gathering of people assembled at the opening of a first floor apartment door. They were dressed in strappy black leather clothing and had angry looks on their faces. The people looked as though they were ready to walk out of the door and waiting to be released, such as when children gather at a classroom door to be released from school. Their energy was a notable combination of anger and eagerness. Standing in front of the open department door was a man fully clothed and had a pleasant appearance. The man spoke to me and said, "You might want to get your children out of here. I'm about to let them loose." It was nearly the end of the next day when I remembered that I dreamed that dream. The dream came to mind instantaneously and very vividly, but I could not tell what it meant. So I marked the dream in my mind. Continuing with my learning and applying it, I noticed more that I was in the midst of arising problems. They were being solved, but they weren't stopping. I sat straight up out of my sleep one of those mornings and said, "It's time for me to get out of here." And then, but wait, is that right? I then asked the Lord in prayer if it is His will that I should leave my place of residence for another, and if so, where should I go? As I continued with my morning routine, I turned on the audio Bible as usual, and the very next thing I heard was, "I will meet you in the wilderness." Hmm, I thought, Then I remembered again what the pleasant man said in the dream. You might want to get your children out of here. I'm about to let them loose. These things caused me to ask the Lord and look for a sign to see if He was telling me to do what I thought He was telling me to do. During that time frame, I had also been desiring to visit my family in Arkansas, a place I had never been yet. My paternal grandparents were born and raised there. We have a large family presence in Arkansas, which strengthened my desire to want to go visit. Therefore, I arranged to take a trip to Arkansas. I asked the Lord to allow me to find a house during my trip to confirm that I should move there. Also, I asked the Lord to hinder me from finding a house if I should not go and move to Arkansas. Therefore, I vowed a vow to the Lord. If I find a place to move into during my visit in Arkansas, I will count that as confirmation from the Lord that He wants me to move, and I will move. Such a move would be a big change to move from California to Arkansas. I had recently bought a house in Victorville, California. The house sits on a corner lot having 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, 2 living areas, a nice sized front, back, and side yard, a double car garage, and a friendly neighbor next door. I was employed by the state of California to stay home and care for a child of mine that is considered disabled by reason of social differences. Besides that, I had other sources that helped our living arrangement stay pleasant and very comfortable. I even housed others in my family at times and gave them rooms in the home the Lord blessed us with. Moving away would mean leaving quite a bit of comfort. California is where I was born and raised. My grandmother, who is from Arkansas, wanted to bring me with her at times when she would travel to there from California. However, I was not able to go for one reason or another. This gave me another motivation to want to go and visit. I would finally get to meet my extended paternal family. My family on my father's side, that I did grow up knowing, were the kindest people I had ever known all of my years to date. My father, James Earl Ward, served honorably in the U.S. Army and was a man of immaculate patience, as was his father. My grandmother, the mother of my father, spoke the laws of kindness continuously with very much elegance and grace. I was really looking forward to meeting more family from that side. I arrived in Arkansas mid-September of 2019 with my son Dimitri and my daughter Leela. We three flew into Little Rock and took a 2-hour drive in the white Chrysler minivan that we rented. All of the back seats were collapsible in the van. It was a nice ride. It was just past midnight when we pulled out of the airport. The roads were dark and had a desolate feel. Trees dominated the view alongside the highways and were very high reaching. I do not recall ever being engulfed by such a force of nature than before that day. The trees were so tall, I could only see a strip of night sky. Then I saw a sign that said, "Welcome to the wilderness." Instantly, I remembered I read a verse that said, I will meet you in the wilderness. I held this in my heart as I looked for more signs. While visiting in Arkansas, I arranged to meet some of my family. Though I hadn't been there before, I did have communication with some of my elders in Arkansas and reached out to them. It also happened that one of my cousins had recently won an election and had become mayor of the city that I would be visiting. That is El Dorado, Arkansas. Between family visits, I went house hunting. It seemed that just about every house I looked at lacked some desired accommodation. Besides square footage and yard space, I promised my daughter Leela that we would be bringing our dog, so we needed the place to be pet friendly also. One house we looked at was nice. It was a light pink house with a fenced in yard. The house might have been built in the 1970s or 80s. There was pretty pink carpet throughout and a general feeling of clean. I liked also that it had an indoor patio. I could picture having a little potted garden in there. The problem with that house is that all of the bedrooms were interconnected. For example, you could only access room B by entering into room A. That would be inconvenient for my family, I thought. They also did not allow pets there, and we have a little white Maltipoo named Casper. We all wanted to bring him. The next house we saw was very narrow and sat across the street from the forest. I was intimidated by the forest being across the street. My imagination got to me on that one. I was picturing bears and wolves or some other aggressive animal coming out of the forest to attack me. I don't feel ready to move to this kind of environment. So I explained to the agent that assisted us. Though there are residential forest areas in California, the areas where I have lived, there had a much different terrain. Thankfully, there were also homes available in areas of El Dorado that were not so heavily wooded. Soon later, I would learn to better appreciate the serenity of the forest environment. However, when I walked into the next house, I could see that there was some, well, work that needed to be done. Yet, my goal was to find positives and be polite. Therefore, I took a thorough look. The kitchen opened up to a lengthy living area. There was also an add on room with a bathroom that appeared to be a garage conversion. The three bedrooms that were easily accessible, the three bedrooms there were easily accessible, each having its own entry by a hallway facing door. The master bedroom had a uniquely styled bathroom. When I saw the bathtub in the master bedroom, that is when I knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that I could not intentionally move into this house. I was horrified. The material in the tub was very old and had an egregious looking texture in the lining. The other bathrooms were also unbearably hideous. So that did it for that house. We had one more house to look at the day before our return to California. This particular house met all of our needs and then some. We then expressed interest in the property and hopped onto a plane back to the West Coast the next day. I was nearly finished with hearing the story of the Bible for the third time when we arrived back at our residence in California. By then, I had noticed that the prophetic books of the Bible correlate directly to the prophecy that is written in the book of Revelation. These findings were very exciting to me. Later, I learned that this is called understanding. At this point of my learning, I had developed a note taking pattern. My notebook had a light blue hardcover binding with faint gold lines in the outer design. The pages were nice and sturdy, so not to easily tear. These sturdy pages were filling up with precepts. I was learning by the will of God to align precepts by subject category. Collecting precepts on one subject at a time greatly opened my understanding of many biblical concepts. Also, as I did my best to apply my learning to my daily living, the Lord God blessed me with more knowledge. His word began to flow through me continuously. By now, I had been asking others to join me in reading or listening to the story in its entirety. I wanted to be able to discuss the literature. So far, I had not come across anyone who would commit to the journey. I even tried reading from chapters that I was excited about to others. Well, it turned out that I was not able to orate the words of the Bible with enough grace to hold anyone's attention at that moment. The difficulty that I was having with reading the words aloud was very new to me. I never had that issue before. Even throughout my childhood, I was often asked to read at school and was unanimously preferred by entire classrooms, teachers, and students to read from novels before the class. Why is it so hard to read this aloud? I wondered. I listened to the reader on YouTube with admiration. He was able to act out all the characters in such an engaging way. The name of the reader I used is Alexander Scorby. Since I hadn't come across anyone that wanted to read or hear the story alone and discuss later, I began to invite people to listen to audio with me. There were some that tried this, but it didn't stick, not even for 15 minutes. Then one person gave me some feedback saying that the quality of the recorded reading had an old feel to it. Okay, I thought, I get the complaint. Now, this complaint that was made against the sound quality of the reading sparked a desire in me. I wanted to be able to read the Bible gracefully and with an entertaining edge. Therefore, I asked the Lord God in prayer for this ability, having faith that the Lord would bless me in some way, even for having that desire. The first week back in California held the determining factor in knowing if the Lord would have me to move or no. This is because I then had to complete the application process for the rental home and wait for a response from the management also. We also were waiting to know from the homeowner if they would allow our little dog there. Then one day I get a phone call and